For 2 years, they walk the land, not just with their feet, but with their hearts open and their spirits listening. In the quiet rustle of leaves, in the winding banks of rivers, and in the echoes carried by the wind, they heard the whispers of a language nearly erased. It was a journey not just to recover names, but to revive memory. And it has been captured in a film, Boodjara. Boodjara, meaning country in Noongar, is more than just a documentary. It is a living archive, a cinematic return to the ancient roots of the southern suburbs of Perth, to a time before colonisation, before asphalt, before maps read through what had already been named. 14 Noongar elders, the keepers of ancestral memory, came together, not to tell a story that had already been written, but to remember one that was almost lost. In long, careful conversations, often held under open skies or beneath trees older than any living person, they breathed life into the original names of places across the city of Melville. Each name carried more than just a label. It carried meaning, function, identity, and love. Yagan Mia, known in English as Wireless Hill, is not just a hill. It is home of the long-necked turtle, a place of nourishment, a place of spirit. A name that once guided the people to food and connection with nature. Point Preston becomes Noongar, place of the salmon. Not just a location, but a seasonal signal. A time for gathering, a moment of bounty. Lucky Bay, that calm stretch of water familiar to weekend swimmers, was once Margamangup, the place where they catch fish by hand from a fish trap. The translation alone invokes an entire practice, a way of living harmoniously with the environment. These are not mere linguistic relics. These names were tools, directions, indicators of life. Their rediscovery is not an act of nostalgia, it's resistance. It's healing. The film, created by Noongar filmmaker Hugh Sando, doesn't rush. It lingers. It listens. It lets the elders speak at their pace, with their voices. It invites viewers not just to watch, but to feel. It was beautiful to watch, Sando said on ABC Radio Perth, recalling how conversations organically led to revelation. Stories of rivers and fish traps, of animals and seasonal shifts, of spirit and connection. As the film unfolded, the timing could not have been more poignant. It was completed just as Australia voted no in the Voice referendum, a national rejection that felt like a wound for many First Nations people. But Boodjara stands in quiet defiance of that moment. It says, even if political voices are denied, cultural voices will persist. It says, country remembers, even if people forget. It shows us that reclamation is possible, not just of names, but of dignity. Of purpose. Of power. For the elders involved, the project was more than research. It was ceremony. It was a passing down. A collective reawakening of what colonisation tried to silence. And it was done with patience. With reverence. With joy. One elder said, it's not just about language. It's about place. It's about knowing where you come from. If you don't know where you come from, how can you know where you're going? The film captures the mapping process in detail, land walked, sites revisited, language cross-checked, memories shared and challenged. Some names came easily, sitting on the edge of recall. Others were deep, requiring careful teasing out through story and song. Sometimes an elder would hear another's story and suddenly remember their own grandmother saying something similar. A spark would catch, a connection would form. That's how the old knowledge returns, not in textbooks, but in voice and breath. One place was identified by the path water took after heavy rains. Another was known by the birds that returned each spring. These were not generalities, they were specific, repeated patterns of life etched into the minds of those who walk the land. The film also records moments of laughter, of teasing between elders, of lightheartedness even amid heavy work. Because this too is part of survival. Joy, community, resilience. What Boodjara does so well is show the labor of cultural recovery without romanticizing it. It shows how hard it is, how fragile memory can be, how necessary trust is. It also shows the pain, how many stories are already gone. How many names were erased, buried beneath suburbs and anglicized street signs. But the film never stops at grief. It builds forward. It becomes a bridge. There's a scene where elders trace lines on old maps, renaming with purpose. Not imposing, restoring. Children appear too, listening, absorbing. A new generation, learning that where they live has older stories than the ones printed in brochures. For viewers unfamiliar with Noongar culture, the film offers an entry point that's intimate, not didactic. It doesn't teach in a classroom sense. It invites you into a conversation already in progress. It lets you sit with elders as they talk about how their own grandparents pointed out a tree or a bend in the river and said, that's where we used to go. It lets you feel what it's like to reclaim what was nearly forgotten. The rediscovery of names in Boodjara is ultimately a rediscovery of identity, of sovereignty, of truth-telling, and it reminds all of us, Noongar and non-Noongar, that this land was never empty. It was never nameless. Every hill, every waterhole, every stretch of coast had meaning. And that meaning can be remembered. It can be spoken again. It can be loved again. And now,